We'll try to keep this as interesting and as relatable to what all of you do as possible, given that I think the breadth of the levels at which you coach, the age of the players, your ability to collect and utilize information is probably vastly different. What I'll give is a little background here on analytics in the NHL, which is a word that you've probably heard a lot about in the last year. Teams have begun to staff those positions quite routinely now, as well as how can analytics help you. But first, what are hockey analytics? One of the great philosophers of our time, Charles Barkley, it's just some crap some people who are really smart made up to try to get into the game because they had no talent. Right here. The full disclosure, the closest I have come to organized hockey was playing with our coaching staff. I think Dominic Pittis wasn't quite a member of that staff yet, but during the work stoppage in 2012, we played on a daily basis. The coaches did not like playing with me at all because I was dangerous. Marty Jelena came by one day and he said, look, one thing. He said, before you move the puck, look up. And I bought myself tons of room for that reason. And listening to that Gatorade presentation, I understand why Marty would sweat instantaneously, and I would go for an hour, and I'd be like, I don't need to shower. But that was a great, I think, experience with those coaches because Bob Hartley and his staff, I think, embraced me a bit because I was willing to go down, be part of their group, and then when the work stoppage ended, Bob asked me to be a component of the staff. I mean, a component over there, but on a game-to-game, day-to-day basis, tracking how our team was generating offense, how we were allowing the other team to generate offense, and anything that I could come up with that would inform him about our opponent, he would utilize. He would occasionally get me in a tracksuit. He would call on me to talk to the team, and when Bob was talking, the team would just kind of look at the screen. If he nicknamed me Bird, which was shortened from Snowbird after he tried on several snow nicknames. He'd say, Bird, what do you have for the group? And the entire room would kind of pivot. Some of them, I think, thought it was helpful. Some thought it was entertaining. Now I'm upstairs where I think I'm best utilized, but still helping Bob. But in all honesty, what are hockey analytics? I think this is, Wikipedia and Charles Barkley can pretty much define anything for us. And I think this is a great definition. The discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. So what can we identify? What can we communicate to whoever the stakeholder is? In my case, the general manager, head coach, in rare instances directly with the players. Meaningful patterns, something that arises on a routine basis that we believe is going to arise again. Because a big component of, I think, having success when you're in my position is you have to be right so often or you won't get any attention thereafter to the ideas you're bringing forth. So I feel that when I make a recommendation to Bob or to our GM, there's got to be real alignment with what they believe in the first place and a good chance to succeed. So take, for an example, this year, our team in Calgary was probably the best 6-on-5 goalie-pulled team in the league. I think we scored 6 or 7 goals, a couple times scoring twice with the goalie out. And I don't think we gave up maybe once or twice in emptying that goal against. I could have gone to Bob a couple years ago with a recommendation saying, hey, let's pull the goalie sooner. The first time you get scored on with 2.5 minutes to play, you're not coming downstairs again. So that was purely Bob, and I think it's a good example of the data might support the recommendation and the best outcome, but it's probably not worth exposing myself to the likely failure the first time after that recommendation. Statistics, I hate the word. It was in my title for 4 years until I pushed my boss to change it this summer. I think that statistics are manipulations of data. Anybody in this room could come up with any statistic to support just about any case that you want to make. Data, I tend to describe to people as outcomes. What we want to do is accurately and consistently define and count as many meaningful outcomes on the ice as possible. There's some great companies here, and I'll talk about it as I move along, that can help even at, I think, the minor hockey level to collect information off of scoring chances, to database that in a web program where you're not fumbling with Microsoft Excel or trying to learn it, where mistakes, even for people in my position, are easy to make. But what's meaningful? What's meaningful to you as the coach of the team? A little background, I suppose, here on the use of video and the use of data in the NHL. In 2006, I went to work for the Minnesota Wild. The first day, the team spent millions and millions and millions of dollars. Was a point when the team was going from that expansion stage to being a really competitive team on players. There was no video to support the decision making. There was no data to support the decision making. The video that the general manager had watched was produced by the video coach, taking him about 4 hours per player video to generate. So it's taking him 2 days to give the GM one game on a player, and there's really very little context to that game. You get a video, you're kind of wondering, when was this played? Why am I seeing this game? No ability to query very specific moments or matchups within a game and within a season. What I did was I went to visit some Major League Baseball teams. I'd had that background as a journalist. They had done everything in their power to keep me away from their baseball operations departments as a journalist. Working in hockey, they allowed me to come back in and study how they applied video and data to decision making. The first thing I saw was this program called BATS, Baseball Analysis Tracking System, and it took every pitch in Major League Baseball and connected that to the corresponding piece of video. We brought the company in to Minnesota and had them do a demo. So literally showing Jacques Lemaire and Mike Ramsey and Mario Tremblay and Bob Mason video of CC Sabathia of the Indians pitching to left-handed batters in a certain count after a certain inning in the game, and then giving the kind of the data that corresponded with that. The coaches were great and understood immediately how that could connect to our sport. I was a little concerned that because baseball is so easy, each pitch is its own event, that the running clock, the line changes that are happening on the fly, that it just couldn't be done. That company built a great product. Other companies have since then built very similar products. But the idea then was that if we wanted to watch a player's, let's say it was a left defenseman, that was our first application. I think Bryce Salvador was available by trade, and we didn't trade for him, but we were able to watch his, so being a left defenseman, his shifts in the third period of tie games against select elite right wings in the league, and just watch how he handled, wide speed, how he handled anything that might have come at him. Whereas before that, that was not possible. Player shifts, for the first time, players were able to come in and watch only their shifts. They could jump to a power play shift in the third period if they wanted to merely see that. Even though that's come along, and I've had several conversations with people in other sports about this, a concept that I call guided viewing, the coach sitting with the player, or specific teaching points kind of displaying within the video window, I think is really important. We put video in the hands of NHL players, and I think for the most part, they're not going to be as effective self-assessing over a 20-minute game, if they played that many minutes, than if the coach sits with them and goes through 5 shifts, and that takes a minute and a half. And I think that's one of the strengths of our coaching staff in Calgary is, one-on-one video. Our assistant coaches, our head coach, tend to divide up the players, and especially when a player first joins the team, make a significant investment in one-on-one teaching, both to teach the system, to teach good habits, but that doesn't end. Veteran players, there may be a little less time spent with them, but that's just because the investment maybe happened when the player first got to the team as opposed to at this given time. We also started to get event data. So if you wanted to watch all the players' shifts, if you want to draw a little box around all the players' shots from a given location, watch the goals the player scored in a given season to see how he scored. Did he score, and this gets more to a front office application, but did he score on a good shot, or were they kind of right time, right place, tip, rebound type goals? But there were teaching applications certainly associated with that. Quickly moving to and watching just a team's power play shifts or penalty kill shifts. This all became possible around 2007. I think adoption across the league probably really happened in 08 or 09. When we first did this in Minnesota, we changed from the system we had been using to the new system. We were concerned it wouldn't work, so we didn't tell Jacques Lemaire that there had been any change. We just did it. And then one day he was kind of like, this is better. And we said, it's just gotten better, I guess. We just kind of played it in that manner because it was a bit of a risk. But we were lucky because we had a good assistant coach who wanted to invest in this type of software. We started to get some data on the value of shots. And this is kind of a bit of a rudimentary graphic, but I kind of like it. So this is, I think this is 2014, so a year ago in the NHL. Try to make it bigger. But just the percent chance of an initial shot at even strength becoming a goal or a rebound shot becoming a goal. And I think from a teaching perspective, what this helped us to do with some players was to really emphasize the need to get into those high percentage areas. And even if you look at those numbers, you're still looking at only a small area there between the face-off circles where the odds of an initial shot are 5% or higher of going in. Certainly emphasize the teaching point of drive the net for second chance opportunities. That spot right above the face-off circle where it's a 1.5% chance of going in, that shot that a winger takes coming down, trying to score short side, high glove, that's just not going in. Because odds are that 1.5% is inflated by a screen situation, something that wasn't a static moment where the winger came down, carried the puck, and scored short side high. Whereas if that puck comes off the goalie's pad for a second chance shot, you're looking at a number that is in the mid-20s there. That said, rebound shots don't happen very often. Teams, I think, have become really aware of the necessity to locate and clear those pucks. It's funny that the company that generated this sent out a note trying to sell more software a few years ago, saying that Jimmy Howard of the Red Wings had the worst rebound save percentage in the NHL. The next year, Jimmy Howard had the best, and I think that was because Detroit became more aware of the need to defend against those second pucks, clean those up, and it was pointed out to him. And that's where when you pass data along, you never know how that's going to influence the player or the audience. If our players have certain tendencies that are good, I would probably not want to point those out because the risk then is that the player becomes aware of it, changes something that he's doing. Because overthinking, especially in a sport where I think our players are unaccustomed to data, at a young level. They don't grow up with data as a component, I think, of playing the game and being developed like baseball players do. And so I think we need to be careful about what we put before them. We begin to understand expected outcomes versus actual outcomes. So let's say a goaltender played in a tremendous defensive system where the majority of those shots came from those peripheral areas. Minnesota with Lemaire would have been an excellent example of that. We didn't have the data at the time to explain that the goaltenders were likely seeing a lower shot quality than other teams. All of a sudden, from a front office perspective, we could look at a goaltender's expected save percentage, so taking all the shots, looking at the rate at which they became goals, and getting a plus minus. So maybe a guy had a 933, but his expected was 937. It's a little high, so maybe we'll say 918, expected 925, so he's actually a minus 0.007, whereas someone playing on a much worse team with what looks like an average save percentage was actually the much better goaltender. And these were exciting breakthroughs because there were no numbers at that point in time to really explain performance outside of goals, assists, points, the very traditional metrics. Initial save percentage versus rebound. And this is one that was very applicable for the coaching staff because I could say, to Bob, this goaltender has, let's say, the highest first shot save percentage in the NHL. He has the lowest rebound save percentage in the league, and that's a very easy statistic for him to explain to the team, and it would, as I'll get to in a minute, complement what already is the teaching point of his, which is get to the net. I'll wait to kind of talk about kind of that line of thinking in a moment. And then face-offs. Face-offs are one of the kind of few baseball-like one-on-one matchups where it's player against player. Side of the ice is a bit relatable to kind of the handedness in a batter-pitcher matchup. And for the first time, we had that data. Unfortunately, the repetitions are not high enough in a given season where a centerman is facing a centerman enough times that you have a huge sample. So I think on a given night, the 10 face-offs on the high end that one center takes against the other might really distort, even a 2-year data set. So it's useful, but like a lot of statistics in hockey, the numbers, use the word statistics, like a lot of data in hockey, the numbers aren't high enough to really identify meaningful trends. And that's where, when we begin to get automated data collection, if it's a chip in the player's jersey, if it is a camera tracking technology, like in the NBA, all the buildings have 6 cameras above the court, and the game moves a lot slower. The players change, at a stoppage in play, but they're collecting the location of those players at 1/25th of a second, as well as the ball. And because of that, they're collecting enormous data sets. Our data sets are so small compared to baseballs and basketballs, but there's companies that are beginning to do that. Companies that are trying to, what's called, kind of sequence the game. There's companies that are doing this kind of manually with a person watching the game. They've written a computer application where the face-off starts at center ice and the person doing the logging is asked a question. First question is, who's taking the face-off for one team, who for the other team? Next question is handedness of the players. Next question is, did he get thrown out? Next question is, who is the linesman? Then did he win it? And if so, where? And the idea is that every successive move of the puck is recorded, so you begin to understand the rates at which players make a D-to-D pass. You begin to understand success rates of passes, puck recovery. Any kind of change of possession or movement of the puck within the team is recorded. Now, the problem with people doing it is that people are doing it. It's going to be a little bit different from person to person. And if you want to buy that, you're talking $500,000 US. We are in Canada. That's about $700,000 for us if we want to do that. That's expensive, even for us. And there's really no evidence to say that whatever happened is going to happen again. So it's giving you context to the game. I mean, I would think that's good information, but if I walked over to a guy in baseball and said, what do you think? He'd say, well, not really sure. You haven't proven to me that whatever the guy did will repeat itself. That's camera tracking technology. The computer chip, I think that this is probably coming in the NHL, probably within a year or two. The Players Association will have to agree to it because there may be information that gets collected about players maybe before and after injury that suggests the players' abilities are diminished. So their concern is of course, the players and compensation. That's the concern. But if we get to that point and know where every player and every puck is at every moment in the game, then we're gathering a lot of information. We understand who's possessing the puck and the distance that they're traveling with it. I suspect we begin to really value those defensemen who can skate with the puck, who can get positive outcomes after they have moved the puck. Time of possession, the idea of possession in the league, is right now, as I think many of you in the room know, it's done by team shot attempts. So you'll hear about a player having a great, Corsi, a great shot attempt percentage, and that's the best we can do to define possession. And it's a concept that drove us crazy in Calgary this year because we never had the puck, according to anyone who writes about the game of hockey on a blog, and it kept defining that. It kind of became a source of pride for us over the course of the year. But it'd be nice to know kind of the specifics of possession and be able to improve your team, to realize what the deficiencies are in a recorded and explainable manner. On the hockey operations side, because I might as well talk about this because this is what I do. For a couple of years, I spent a lot of my time with the coaching staff. When Bob Hartley first came in, he'd been in Europe, he'd been on TV, he hadn't coached in the league in a few years. I give him credit for being curious about things that he probably hadn't been hearing about, being data, when he was coaching previously in Atlanta and in Colorado. And Bob asked if I could kind of be part of the group. The last couple of years, I still sit with Bob before each game, and I distill everything that we've collected that I think might be relevant to a single page. Bob then decides whether he mentions any of it to the team, whether it affects how he puts together a line or who he matches up with. If there's a good face-off matchup in the third period, I'll try to just focus on a moment that might come up in the game and say, if this situation comes up, I think this is your best option, and here's why. And Bob's really good about listening. And what I do try to do, I'm skipping ahead here, but the data I give to Bob, I always try to bring in the coach's language, in the way that they would speak about the game with each other and the way they would speak to the players. So that there's nothing lost in translation for one, but I'm adapting to them. I'm not asking them to adapt to me. I think if I start to get into concepts that were less easy to justify and that took explanation, then I'm wasting his time. And the next time I come down, there's a little less interest in that conversation. So what I do is upstairs is trying to build and most teams are, I think, trying to do this, either in-house or through a third-party company, what's called a relational database. That means relate every single moment of the game and every component that we have information for, which for now is NHL events, so shots, player time on ice, hits, goals, assists, penalties, block shots, and the location of each of those we get from the league. The situation, 5-on-5, 5-on-4, 4-on-5, 4-on-4, etc. Time in the game, and all 10 or more or fewer players on the ice. The idea being that any question you might want to ask about the game, you can drill into that given moment and then answer that. When we get better data, the questions we can ask and the answers we can get will improve, and that will come with a tracking system. Ideally, a league-wide tracking system, so that we have it off of all of the team's games. As we start to develop kind of what I'll call proprietary metrics, the way that we define players, the data that we want to use to explain whether a player is excellent, average, below average, would be to really explain how does the player contribute to offense, how does the player contribute to defense in a positive or negative way. It might be plays disrupted. How does a player, when he tends to allow a chance or a goal, are there meaningful patterns to that? And I think most teams in the league would be collecting our own data that does allow us to answer those questions. But the hope is that in a couple of years, we're getting a lot more data to answer those in a lot more detailed a manner. And then quality of competition. There are a number of websites that try to define this. We have a way that we do it internally that I really believe in. The idea being, are you on the ice against an elite player? Are you on the ice against multiple elite players? Are you never on the ice against a player who is one of the other team's best 3 or 6 offensive players? And when you have that information, it allows you to contextualize the performance. So maybe a player is doing everything he does well offensively when he's out there against a third or a fourth line, but can't against better competition. And you understand usage. You understand whether the coach is putting the player out there against a first-line competition or if he's really spotting him, so to speak. And that helps us with matchups, and that helps us with identifying maybe a player on another team who we should target because we like him, but his coach doesn't seem to because he's not playing against good players at all, or he's playing against good players less than any player on his team. And then ideally, that information, when someone like myself is presenting it, aligns with the coach's and the scout's opinion. When that happens, then it gives confidence to the coaches to go with it, to our GM to make a decision. When it doesn't, that's when, hopefully we have a good discussion. If they say, that's just wrong, then that's when someone like me is in trouble. As far as the application of coaching, successful hockey teams, and you all know this, have an identity. Our team in Calgary got a lot better the last couple of years because I think we had players with good character who wanted to be better. I think we had coaches who improved those players, put them in positions to succeed, but we created an identity. We became a team that wanted to be as hardworking as any team in the league. We got there through blocking shots. We set an all-time record for block shots this year. The data guys would say that's because we never had the puck. I think there's a little bit of will on our players' part there, because that was a pretty impressive thing. But we created an identity. The data that I collect, that we collect and share with the coaches and players must support that identity. There's no sense collecting a great data set if it doesn't reinforce what you want to be telling your players anyhow. So when I go to Bob with something about our team and our players, I always want that to support a teaching point of his in the first place, because then he's going to want to hear it, and then he's going to probably want to pass that along to the team. Now, if there's something that flies in the face of what he's doing, we're going to sit there and have a conversation, and I'm hoping that it goes well, but there's certainly data, and a lot of it, that I believe in from an analytical standpoint that supports what he's trying to accomplish. And that's the nature of the data I think you should be collecting. Whatever you as a coach want your team to do, find meaningful ways to define that, collect that, and use that with your team. Because if the data is out of alignment with your general teaching principles, then it's useless. You're set back as opposed to moving ahead. As I mentioned, kind of language is critical. The language that I speak to the coaches in is their language. Information is only as good as your ability to use it. Hockey is a reaction sport. Repetition, which is practice, creates instinct in a reaction sport. Data can introduce thinking. We've kind of had this debate for a few years about shootouts, because shootouts are kind of that one, along with face-offs, that static moment where it's one-on-one. It's you and the goalie. There are some goalies who have glaring profiles. They're impossible to score against on the ice. You can try to shoot along the ice. You can more likely deke if you're going around the pad or 5-hole, and you're not going to score there. Some goalies never, ever poke check. I did tell the team that once. The guy came out with a flying poke check on the first player. I went back to get some food. I didn't get any food. I just kind of came back. And again, that's the low outcomes, right? If it's only 20 events over 3 years and the guy says, geez, I need to change this up, you might change it up and then you're toast. So with shootouts, my position has been, hey, this data is great. Let's share this with the players. I think then some players start thinking more about the goaltender and what he might do, as opposed to having belief, conviction in that one move or that one move off of their move. And that's a debate, that we've had with our coaches, with our players. I'm not sure what the right position is on that, but there's no question that we're introducing a level of thought to the players at a moment when we probably want the confidence, their own confidence in their ability to be the most important thing. Baseball, which I've leaned on quite a bit for their years and years of data collection, for all the good minds there, they have an ocean of data. They use a drop of that. And the best example, when we played the Ducks in the playoffs, the manager of the Houston Astros was in town because his team was playing the Anaheim team, and I know him from a previous team. And I sat down with him and I said, how do you use that information? And he said, we are very selective. We generally tell the hitter one thing right before the at-bat. And that thing comes back to, in what situation can the hitter do the most damage? So he said, maybe at 2-0, so 2 balls, no strikes, a certain pitcher throws a fastball low and away 90% of the time. That might be the only thing they tell him, and they know every pitch tendency. So 0-0, he throws fastball, curveball, slider, changeup, splitter, this percentage of the time, this percentage for strikes. They get off every pitch in baseball. 70 rows of data means 70 pieces of information off of every pitch thrown in minor league baseball. So I said, well, how much do you give? He said, maybe one piece, but only if there's one so glaring, and we believe the hitter has the discipline to only swing if the pitch is in that location. Because if you're looking for something and you don't get it, and you still swing, you're not going to hit it in Major League Baseball. So that's, I'm sure they're analytics guys, and that team has tons of them. They call their director the Director of Decision Sciences. So they're into it. They think it's impressive. And they're winning, so it's working. But ultimately, the manager of that team, who I would say is one of the most capable managers in Major League Baseball of filtering information to his players, might give a hitter one piece of information before an at-bat. So ultimately, the best application of the data is in the office. It's the office being able to make informed decisions about the patterns of players coming up and the likelihood of those players repeating that. So at your level, and you're at different levels, what can you collect? I'll go through a few concepts here, and there's some companies I think that are offering very low-cost solutions, a few $100s that allows you to identify the moments in games you want to collect, to have your roster in there to tie that information to the player, to the situation, to the opponent, meaning only against this team, or only the last 5 games, and then be able to pull that data back up. And doing so in like a web interface where you're not going to mess it up. Excel spreadsheets, you have one thing on the wrong row and you make one mistake and your thing's done. You're throwing it in the trash. So I'd recommend one of these products. Penalties taken versus penalties drawn. Real easy thing to track and real valuable. When a team goes from 5-on-5 to 5-on-4 in the NHL, the odds of scoring multiply by 3. I've never told Bob that. Bob believes in discipline. I think we led the team or led the league this year in times shorthanded or penalty differential, maybe both. But that's actual value. That's putting your team in a position where the odds of scoring are enhanced. And that's really straightforward. Penalties by zone. Really, there aren't many penalties of necessity that occur outside of the defensive zone. A player takes a penalty in the offensive zone in the power play. It's about the worst thing that he can do on the ice. Again, easy, I think relatively easy to track that. And again, the penalty data should, I think, support and reinforce teaching points. If a player can have a ton of speed, if he's not on the puck, around the puck, he's not going to draw penalties. If a player doesn't have good details defensively, body positioning, stick, he's going to take penalties. Scoring chances. I suspect a lot of you in this room are already doing this type of work, but if you can get a basic database that relates those events back to individual players, to pairings, to lines, and certainly you probably have more categories than just offensive zone, possession, rush, and forecheck, but those are a few examples. You begin to assign responsibility to the players, any other details that you might find worthwhile to record. And then you have a narrative about your team. You have a narrative about how, when we've been winning, do we create offense? When we've had a difficult time, how are we allowing chances? Who is allowing them? And that becomes a teaching point. If there's a real pattern to the type of chance that a player is allowing, then that enables you to go to the player, maybe with the data. If you have it tied to video, that's ideal, because the best delivery method of data is video. Video should illustrate data because it's compelling. It's happening right there on the screen. Face-offs, maybe by zone, offensive zone and defensive zone face-offs are more important than neutral zone face-offs, I think. There are certain players in the NHL who, I would draw the conclusion that they tend to have an identity where they bear down in one zone. Maybe they value winning an offensive zone draw more than a defensive zone draw. Maybe they inflate their percentage by winning a bunch in the neutral zone where their opponent is less interested in winning it, or where their opponent is trying something out because it might help him in a successive face-off in zone. By situation, PP and PK, those face-offs, I would say, are the most valuable outside of something in the last minute of a game. Side of the ice, there's no question that there's more difficulty depending on the matchup. If you're on your weak side, it's harder to win, especially if the other guy's on his strong side. But that's the kind of data where you begin to get a bit more context to a player's winning percentage on a face-off. Maybe by line. Maybe you put the responsibility on the 3 players to win that face-off because there are not a lot of clean draws won, and track that type of statistic. On the power play, at the end of the night, we're always down there looking at 0 for 6, 2 for 4, and feeling great on that basis, because if it's the former, we probably lost. If it's the latter, we probably won. But what are kind of the inputs in a power play? Well, it's winning that first draw, because otherwise the puck's going down, and that's 15 to 20 seconds. It's shot volume. Generally on the power play, a higher volume of shot correlates over time to greater success. The teams that shoot a lot in the power play, just attempts, not talking on goal, but attempts have a higher percentage. There are exceptions. Those exceptions tend to be teams that have real high-end skill or real high-end skill on the blue line, like a great shooter back there, a Shea Weber type player. Shot recovery, if you're going to shoot a lot, you need to be ready, your forwards need to be ready to recover that puck. Tracking who is recovering pucks could be a beneficial data point. Back to that image of where goals occur, shots from between the dots. Because then you have multiple outcomes, like an open-ended hand in poker. If you're shooting from outside the dot, there's almost no chance of you getting a rebound shot. There's almost no chance of it going in. If it's coming between the dots, you have a chance for a tip, you have a chance for the puck to go in, greater chance, you have a chance for a rebound. And rebound shots, which are real valuable. Rebound shots in the power play are probably the most valuable shot in hockey. They don't happen a ton, but a rebound in the power play, I think, is going in about 33% of the time in the NHL. So that's a data point that when you give it to a player, that's something they can utilize. What else you can collect? Objectives. In Calgary, we kind of have a list of objectives for every game. We have a color. This is just for the coaches in the office. It's kind of color-coded. If we met the objective, it's in one color. If we didn't meet the objective, it's in the other color. And at the end of the night, that allows us to take the emotion out of the game and say, okay, should we have won this game, whether we did or not? Maybe we win, but realize that the things we did should not have added up to a win. And over time, we can spot some trends with our team. Again, these are kind of final recommendations, and then any questions you have I would take. Collect only what supports your teaching points and your team identity. I think that's the most important thing. Ensure that what you collect is well-defined. Know going in, like, this is specifically how we want to define this data point. Collect it accurately and consistently. Easiest way to do that is to have the same person doing that collection, game in and game out. And use video to illustrate data. Because again, I think sitting with players, you can give them numbers. I think that numbers can be offensive. I think numbers they're unaccustomed to. When you take them through a series of clips that illustrate that data, I think that's when you have the best chance to be kind of impactful in bringing that data to life. Thank you.